Today we have another opportunity to just really dig into a dynamic topic with a dynamic speaker. We're joined today by Sue Trombino of Women Impacting the Nation. And Sue, I just want to jump straight into it this morning. So tell me a little bit about who is Women Impacting the Nation. What's your message? How do you go about sharing that?
Well, thank you both for having me. I'm very honored to be here and just to talk, just to have a conversation today. But Women Impacting the Nation, our mission statement is that we educate and equip women and men with knowledge of God's truth about our faith, our family, and our freedoms. And then we help support those who take a stand for the Judeo-Christian principles upon which our country was founded.
One of the scriptures that we're all familiar with is, "My people perish for a lack of knowledge."
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to the people of the United States, their government, what is the lack of knowledge that people have?
I think we've lost our education system. Our education system we've dumbed down. I mean, we started America with the New England Primer. The New England Primer is I wish I'd brought it with me, but it's a little tiny blue book, which we were taught on our Judeo-Christian principles. We went through the alphabet and, A, and Adam's fall, we sinned all, B, just all the way down through our biblical values. And we've just, when we could spend hours talking about how our educational system has really dumbed down because we've taken out our Judeo-Christian values and we've become apathetic. We really have. I think we're Americans, I think we're getting out of this, but I think Americans are in a bubble. And we think, that's not going to happen here. Right. This is America. We are very blessed to be able to, we don't have bombs on our head. We just kind of, we're spoiled. Let's just be honest. We're spoiled rotten.
Yes, we are.
We don't have to worry about too much. We can go to the grocery store. We can have religion. We don't have to have religion. We can, do or say whatever we want. And we've taken this country for granted. And I've always said that if we continue to become apathetic, disengaged, and disinterested, and we lose America, can I ask you and your audience, where do you go from here?
Yeah.
Because everybody in the world wants to come here, but where do we go? And so we have become a nation of non-thinkers. And Karl Marx said a nation of non-thinkers is easily led. And so we have got to get back to finding truth. What is truth? Sometimes people don't even know what is truth. We've become a very self-absorbed, self-centered society. What's good for me is good that we're not looking at, our president, JFK, one thing he said was, ask not what your country can do for you, but what can you do for your country?
What are you seeing are the major crises between the church and government today? What are you seeing as the major thing that people in churches today need to understand so that they know how to deal with government?
Number one, we have to know what we believe and then why we believe it. Do we know as Christians, can you articulate why you're a Christian? I believe that Josh McDowell took 100 pastors and he said, why are you a Christian and why are you a pastor? And half of them couldn't tell him. I've done a lot of surveys just on my own. I've done a lot of surveys just on my own. And I ask people, they'll say to me, Sue, well, I'm a Christian. And I'll say, well, what does that mean to you? And I think I think a lot of people want to get involved. They want to make a difference, but they don't know how because there's two things is they don't know what they believe and why they believe it. So they stay back and because they don't want to sound ignorant, they don't want to sound silly, so they don't say anything. So I think we have to start with, can you articulate why you're a Christian? Can you articulate why are you an American? What does patriotism mean to you? What is the role of government? And we've lost that because most people have not, Christians too, some of them don't even know that there's 66 books in the Bible. They don't know really what the Bible says. And going into the government, they haven't read their Constitution. So they don't know they don't know what their liberties are. They don't know what we're allowed to do, what we're not allowed to do. And the government is, a lot of things I think goes back to the separation of church and state.
Mm-hmm.
That has been so taken out of context.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people say, we can't get involved in politics because that's separation of church and state. Well, that's a misnomer because nowhere in the Constitution does it say separation of church and state. The only place where it says separation of church and state is in the Constitution of the Soviet Union. And people go, well, wait a minute. Well, why did we get the separation of church and state? Well, we have to know that it came from a letter for Thomas Jefferson to the Danbury Baptist Church. It said, yes, there was a wall of separation, but that is so that the government could not tell the church what their role is, what they can and can't do. And I think churches, Christians, need to start taking authority in what Christ has said. We are going to be held accountable to the Lord. And he's not going to say, well, that was well said.
One of the controversial topics that I just want to maybe bring some clarity to today is many pastors today feel like that we cannot endorse candidates. We cannot speak about a particular candidate's stance because we're under a 501c3 restriction that says we can talk about platforms and we can talk about issues, but we cannot endorse candidates. One of the things that President Trump did in May of 2017 is he wrote an executive order telling the IRS that you can no longer prosecute for that kind of thing. You can't come against the church for endorsing candidates and speaking. It really should give us more of a freedom voice. Now, let me be clear. We always had the voice, but now we have an additional backing of the executive order that says if we want to endorse particular candidates, now that would give us the opportunity to not be in any kind of contradiction with the government, not worry about oppression from the government, to be able to say, these are the candidates that seem to follow Christian values, and these are the candidates that don't. And you mentioned earlier, there were three kind of basic lines that we shouldn't cross at all as far as the Bible and government. Why don't you address that a little bit?
God has lots of non-negotiables, but there are three that God says that are non-negotiable. Well, one is life. God's breathed life into Adam. Our Constitution says it's life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You cannot have pursuit of happiness or liberty unless you have life first.
Correct.
So life is a non-negotiable. Number two is marriage between a man and a woman, a biological man and a biological woman. And because God made Adam and Eve, and then he says, go out and, multiply, right? And then the third is Israel. He says, those who bless Israel will be blessed, and those who curse Israel will be cursed.
Mm-hmm.
Those are three non-negotiables. Now, in our country, we have two parties. And unfortunately, a lot of times people vote because their family, is Republican or Democrat or whatever. It's because their family is their neighbors or spouses. The media is telling them, or it's a peer pressure thing.
Right.
But it's really about, what does God say? If you are a Christian, those three have got to play into your non-negotiables.
Mm-hmm.
And there's two platforms. And if you look at the platform, in my humble opinion, there is only one platform that espouses those three.
Right.
Because the government is only supposed to be there is supposed to have limited government.
Right.
Where, to be able to let us do what we can, let us be, we have to be accountable for our own actions. That's self-governing. We don't want the government telling us what we can and can't do. That is what God's supposed to do. So we have to be able to be self-governed. But those non-negotiables are a huge deal because everybody has a worldview. I mean, if you want me to go down this road there.
Absolutely.
But first of all, those three are non-negotiable, and our vote is a seed, and we will reap what we sow.
Good word.
Yes.
And so if, people say, why are we in the mess that we're in? Well, with all due respect to everybody, we're in the mess that we're in because the church has been silent. And silence is consent.
Right.
Silence is not an option.
Mm-hmm.
And again, God is not going to say, well, that was well thought, and that was well said, Jen, and, well, you know what, that was well intentioned. He's only going to say two words, well done. And so are we going to say, am I worried about what my neighbor thinks or what God thinks? So I really believe that, we all have a worldview. that's a given. But it's either biblical or pagan. And the problem, I believe, in the church is that we have compartmentalized our worldview. And if you say you're a Christian, and because we've so dumbed down everything, we don't want to offend somebody. So we go, well, that's okay. It's okay that we listen to that, or it's okay that we watch that. But no, everything we see in a biblical worldview, you have to look through, what lens are you looking through the world? Is it, worldview, or is it, what does God say? How we think, what we say, what we do. It's really about what does God say. And the churches, unfortunately, we have not changed the culture. The culture has changed the church.
Truth.
Mm-hmm. And we are dumbing down, and therefore we're in the mess that we're in because the church has not taken authority. We're too afraid. And I've dealt with so many pastors, and I've tried to encourage them and saying, you know what, you're the one that's going to be held accountable more so than the layperson, because you're behind that pulpit. And so we have got to raise the bar to say, you know what, guys, I've had pastors that have said, I am sorry, I have to repent because I have not raised the bar. And I was afraid of what you would think, or what you would, and then money. And if I don't kind of coddle to my congregation, then I'm going to lose the money. So,
you've really addressed, and I don't think any pastor, speaking as a pastor, I don't think any pastor would want to say they're coddling to money. And I'm not denying the statement you've said, but I think something else has replaced that actually includes that. And that is a tolerance to all. In other words, how do I make sure that everybody feels welcome to come to the church? Everybody wants to be here, whether they support a Democratic platform or a Republican platform and an independent. I don't want to try to cross lines and get people uncomfortable. But what it's actually done is gone back to the silence is consent. Because then pastors, by not teaching, by not speaking, by not saying this platform is anti-biblical, this platform does not support God, these issues need to be addressed and we need to be thinking about those. Then you have the flip side of the argument. Yeah, but when you support a particular candidate who has biblical views, we also see that they have these negatives. The way they talk to people, the way they address things, they've also had these things in their personal life. And the truth be known is there's not any perfect people out there.
So glad you said that.
There's not any perfect people, but there is an accountability for the believer in who he votes for. Who you are voting for and what stance you are taking becomes critical. And because the church has said, we want to be loving to all people, we don't want to offend anyone. And to some degree, some have maybe said, if I take a stance for what's biblical when it comes to government, I may lose some of my congregation. Listen, you've already lost that part of your congregation because you have no influence on them. You don't have any biblical influence on them. You're patronizing and catering.
So good.
And so it's time for pastors to say, hey, I've got an accountability before God for what I have taught people, for what I have spoken from those pulpits, for how I am leading and guiding. And to not lead and guide and allow error is your accountability. That becomes a tough thing. I mean, Scripture's pretty clear that there's a double accountability on those who teach.
If there's pastors or churches out there that don't understand this, like what the rights are, how to believe, where do they get this information? How do they get informed? How do they get equipped? And I believe you're with women in impacting the nation. How can we women get together and, utilize what you've already done and so to begin impacting our territories and our families and our churches?
You can go to our website, first of all, womenimpactingthenation.org. And we have what's called WIN Talks. And WIN Talks are, in a nutshell, they're like book clubs. And you get educated with, again, truth and facts, not emotion and conjecture. We get you educated with, I call them potty books. They're very thin books. If I gave you David Barton's Original Intent, which is about this thick, when you're first wanting to learn, it's going to be intimidating for you. But we work with a lot of the patriots and godly patriots that are from Matt Staver of Liberty Counsel, David Barton, Bob McEwen, God is the Issue by Brad Bright. We work with a lot of different groups that, with books that just get you educated, again, with truth and facts. And so If you go to our website or you call our number, we have WIN talks all over the country, and it's amazing how people have been, wow, I didn't know that. They didn't know about separation of church and state. I was a BSF leader, and it was amazing how many even BSF leaders then they're like, well, we're not supposed to get involved in politics, and I go, well, what about your civic duty? Again, we have to be educated with the facts, but God is separating the wheat from the chaff. He's separating the sheep and the goat. And he doesn't, a lot of times I think in churches, and I think you alluded to it, Pastor, that, we're not supposed to offend anybody. Well, first of all, the Christian is not supposed to be offendable. We're supposed to be unoffendable. And then in Luke, I think it's Luke, you can correct me. I'm not sure which verse it is right now, but in Luke, it talks about, the Lord says, I have come to divide, not to do everybody's supposed to be together and we're not supposed to offend anybody, because the truth offends. Mm-hmm. But once you understand that, God has so many great plans for you. And when you're trying to not offend everybody, you're really losing out on what God's got for you. And, so we really want to go to truth. Mm-hmm. And right now we're in this mess because the church hasn't stepped up to the plate.
Sue, what would you say, or how would you respond to the question that you actually raised earlier, that the church shouldn't get involved in government? What if someone says to you, hey, I grew up in church and our understanding was always we should not be involved in government. How do you address that?
Well, again, I think unfortunately they've been misled, because who did Jesus speak to? Jesus spoke to the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Well, who are they? They were the government. And somebody's worldview is going to win out. It's either biblical or pagan. Mm-hmm. And it talks about, again, in Isaiah and all, to put in godly people into local, state, and national government. Mm-hmm. And you said something about, there's not, this candidate has this issues and everything. Well, until Jesus Christ himself is on that ballot, there's not going to be a perfect candidate.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
So we have to find the one that's closest to our biblical values, to the one that's closest to what we believe. And especially if you're a Christian, what does God say? Mm-hmm. And then the platform. You may not like the person on that, on the ticket, but if they're on that platform, then we have to vote for the platform. Mm-hmm. That's where you go there. And we have to do our due diligence. And the problem is that, for example, in Boca Raton, where I live, there are 60,000 registered voters. In the last local election, 6,000 voted.
No.
And this is all around the state of Florida, all around our country. That is the norm. Mm-hmm. There are 25 million Christians that are not even registered to vote. 15 million, this is a million, 15 million chose not to vote and stay home. I don't like that candidate. I don't that. And then, that's why we're in the mess that we are in today, because they are not. No.
I was just thinking this morning, we were listening to the Talk with Family Research Council, and I was just thinking of how many church people I know, believers, that are actually kind of working against the candidate right now because they don't like these cosmetic issues about him or the personal demeanor, but yet so many godly things are happening, for the church, for Israel, the Golan Heights. So many good decisions are being made for the church and believers, and yet they're speaking against when they actually have a candidate that is doing many godly things. So
I would like to really address that, because as WIN, for Women Impacting the Nation, and again, we do women and men, and I'll go into that in a little bit, but when we show up, we win. That's our tagline. We're not showing up.
Good, yeah.
The Christian isn't showing up. If only a quarter of the Christians would vote our biblical values, we would win in a landslide every single time. We're not showing up. Now, going back to what you were saying about our President Trump. We at WIN we're a 501c3. That means that we do not tell you how to vote or who to vote for. I stir the pot and get you to think what your values are and what God says about that.
Right.
But With our president right now, he has been, and I really want your audience to hear this very clearly, because I am very blessed to work with Tony Perkins, with all these different groups, what I've told you, Matt Staver, John Stemberger. I've been privileged. These are godly men.
Mm-hmm.
But Tony has the ear of our president. He's incredible. This call that we were on today with pastors, with the Attorney General Barr, with Mike Pompeo, with all the vice president, and it's amazing because our president is the most pro-life president we have ever had.
Right.
Now, you need to hear the truth, not what you hear on the media, which is all propaganda. I don't listen to the media. I don't listen to any of that because it really is all propaganda. Living overseas, I've lived in socialist countries, communist countries. I know propaganda. And so I really am asking your audience to really get the truth. Don't do something that sounds good. Don't listen to what sounds good, because that's usually a red flag. Go get educated, again, with truth and facts.
Right.
But our president is the most pro-life president we have ever had.
Mm-hmm.
He is the most pro-religious freedom and liberty president we have ever had.
Truth.
He is the most pro-Israel president we have ever had.
Right.
I mean, both parties for decades have said we're going to move the embassy. We're going to move this man did it.
That's right.
You will know them by their fruit.
Right.
Now, what I do ask everybody, and I've been doing this a lot, when people say, well, I don't like Trump's tweets, I don't like this about him, I don't like his hair, I don't like that. Well, let me ask you this. If you are a history buff, I would like to ask one question. What did you think of Winston Churchill and Patton? If anybody doesn't know their history, they were both womanizing, foul-mouthed, whiskey drinking, cigar smoking kind of guys.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying that's good, bad, or indifferent. You guys decide that. I'm just telling you what they were.
Yeah.
And I told a gentleman yesterday, I said, they kind of made Trump look like a fairy. This guy's really good.
Yeah.
You may not like, but he never punches first. He's always, he's been punched, he punches back. He will not, and we're not used to that. Now, for me, I'll tell you honestly, to your congregation, I mean, I want somebody that's going to have my back, that's going to love America and do the best for America. Again, we are never going to have a perfect candidate, but I'm grateful that we have a president that is standing for the things that I believe in. You know, as a Christian, I am an out-of-the-closet, card-carrying, unashamed Christian. I'm a conservative, and I'm a Frederick Douglass Republican in that order. But we have life, we have freedom of religion, and if we lose those freedoms of religion, and we have the other party that is saying they are pro-abortion, they will take away your religious freedoms, they want socialism, they want to pay for illegals, they want everything that God is against, they are for. And so therefore, to me, it's very perfectly clear, but you have to really do your due diligence. You have to, as your own person, decide what is best for you. But remembering not why, but what. What is your legacy going to be for your children? What are you doing today that's going to impact our the next generations? And am I going to be a part of it, or am I going to sit on the sideline? We can either get in the game and do, what God wants us to do, and really be a part of history. We are here, lezman hazeh, for such a time as this.
Amen.
And so for me, I just know my dad has left me a legacy. I look at what he's done, and I try to do that for my son. And I don't want my future grandchildren to say, well, what did grandma do? What did Safta do? That's Hebrew for grandma. I like Safta. What did she do? Well, she made phone calls. She got out there and knocked on doors. She supported a candidate. She prayed. Praying, repenting, do something, find your lane, and do something that's going to change this country. Because if you don't, are we going to be like 1962 and 63, and we sit back and going, what the heck happened when they took out prayer and Bible out of the school? And it was the main reason, well, one woman helped do that, but it was also because the pastors were telling their congregation not to get involved in politics. Well, no. You're either going to be PC or BC, biblically correct or politically correct. And the only thing that politically correct means is that you can speak, but I can't.
It's time for the church to be involved in government. Quite honestly, the majority of woes and complaints the church has today about where our nation is at is because the church chose not to be involved in those decisions.
Exactly right.
And until the church stands up and says, I'm not going to allow that in my county because it shames my God. I'm not going to allow it in my state. I'm not going to allow it in my country. It's time for the believer to get involved. I believe that it should become our goal to get believers in the place of elected positions, including our presidency. And so I'm not making a statement on whether we have a believer in there today or not. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is it's time for the church to stop deciding there needs to be a separation between church and state.
Right.
The state needs to be influenced, governed by the church. And so it's time for us to make a stand. When we choose not to get involved, when we choose not to vote, when we choose to say, since there is no perfect candidate, I will not vote, all we're doing is allowing the world and the enemy and the prince of this world, the prince of darkness, to expand and elevate the kingdom of darkness. Christians, it's time to stand up. Sue, I thank you so much for being here today. I want to strongly encourage you to go check out the website, womenimpactingthenation.org, including the Facebook page, Women Impacting the Nation. Get to know Sue, get to know her ministry, support that ministry, get involved with it, and let's stand up as believers and decide enough is enough. It's enough that the kingdom of darkness has advanced so far, and we as believers have not stood up against it. God bless you. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Sue Trombino, for joining us today. We wish you all a blessed day. Have a good one.